Hello, Dan. Congratulations on this
Very much.
movie. So I want to sort of begin just by, I guess, explaining to a lot of people who might be a little confused when they first see it that you have in common with Sandra Bullock, in addition to being very successful actors, you are both fluent in German.
I didn't know that Sandra Bullock was fluent in German.
She is. That's
very good to know.
You'll have to practice with her someday.
Yeah, maybe we can do a German movie together. That would be awesome.
Why not? Now, did you, people will wonder, did you learn it for this film, or it's something that's in your background?
It's in my background. I've spoken German probably since I was about 9 or 10. I started learning it at school. And we had some family friends who lived in Germany, and we used to visit them on vacation. And so I've always been speaking it, always practiced it, and always had a sort of fondness for it. I don't know why. It just sort of, you know, it sparked me, and it's amazing that it sort of continued through my whole life, and you know, up to this point where I've managed to use it and combine two of my great loves, yeah, you know, use it for a role like this.
It's not actually your first film in German, is that right?
It's not. No, I did one about 13 years ago. I played an Englishman who spoke German in a biopic of Hildegard Knef. Yes. That was very much a German release. It didn't travel the world quite like this one has done. But it was fun nonetheless, and really interesting to sort of, you know, practice my film German, which was not something I had learned in school. You know, just being on a film set in Germany is quite a different experience, and just working in another language is an amazing challenge. But yeah, so this was my second German film technically.
And like, you know, like in that film, you were playing an Englishman. Here, you're actually not even playing a man, not really, right. but he does have an English accent. We find out in the movie that is a plot detail that is included, I guess, because the film's main character well, I guess we should talk about the plot, but wanted someone with an exotic quality to their voice, which I guess would have been for Germans an English accent. Do you want to maybe describe the film as much as you think would be fair to an audience who maybe hasn't seen it? Because we don't want to go too deep. Well,
we can, but I don't know how much would spoil it, but it's really about a woman who is fairly recently single. She's an academic, and she has been asked by her university to road test this android boyfriend experience, where an android partner is created according to your algorithm. So to all intents and purposes, the perfect partner. But of course, we all know that doesn't really exist, and even when it's an android. And so that's where our story begins. Really, we're like in at the deep end with this test, really. And yeah, so Alma she's supposed to spend 3 weeks, I think, living with this android called Tom, and that's me.
And you're right. The opening scene establishes this, including we see you dancing.
Exactly. Yes, the rumba. Although I suppose in that first scene you don't quite know what is happening.
Right.
Like it's not immediately obvious, but it's in the log line of the movie. I think you know what you're getting into. But
and it's also
there's no sort of gentle introduction to the program. That sort of comes a little bit later, where she's talking with her faculty boss, I guess, you know, just talking about how ridiculous this thing is. But yeah, we just find her arriving in a ballroom. There's a bunch of couples. It looks like a sort of whether it's like speed dating or something, but it's just, yeah. And this guy is just coming out with all the cheesy chat-up lines.
Yes. I mean, now this is a subject matter that has been explored, you know, in stuff like The Twilight Zone or Black Mirror, or in movies like Blade Runner. But I mean, the thing that I kept going back to was Vertigo, Hitchcock's Vertigo, which is not a science fiction movie, but is about what you just said. The impossibility of making a perfect partner, and how we actually don't really want that anyway. So I'm curious, when you first at the script, and talk to Maria Schrader, the great director and great actress, actually, who
Yeah.
made the movie. What kind of conversations did you first have? I guess maybe internally with yourself, and then also with your director.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting you bring up Vertigo, because actually, that it's also like the Pygmalion story. It's a sort of time-worn thing. Both that story and also the trope of like a naive character being dropped in a modern world, setting, and like how do they get on? What do they think? So it's a sort of combination of those with a bit of screwball comedy thrown in, and that was something actually that we talked about initially quite a lot. Was what kind of, not so much like what kind of robot is he, but what kind of man is he trying to be? And so initially having the opportunity to almost satirize what we might think of as a romantic lead, and like the role that Tom thinks he's supposed to play in any given situation, and having a bit of fun with that, that made it even more appealing. I mean, it was very appealing on the page that it seemed both very sweet and funny and light. There was a great opportunity for physical comedy, which I love. But also it seemed to be asking huge philosophical questions, which seems to be very German, to, tackle epic concepts, but in a sort of very, very easy manner. And so that delighted me. And, but yeah, once I got chatting with Maria, it was really about looking at screwball comedies. We talked a lot about Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart for some reason. That was our sort of jumping off point. And thinking about how stylized some of those performances are, and the mannerisms. And what if you were to abstract some of those, so we just took a scene or two of Philadelphia Story or something, and just like, well, what if Tom thinks he's supposed to stand like that in this given situation, which is just makes no sense to a human, but he's just like, okay, now I'm going to do that, and so we just sort of abstracted some screwball comedy tropes and just sort of threw them in there, threw the timing off a bit, and just kind of, and once you break down a human movement and sort of take away 3 of the 6 elements in a sequence, and you're like, what's he doing? And it just looks odd, but it was very much more based on the human and on the sort of the romantic lead idea than on the robot. The film doesn't really get into the tech, and ultimately that's not so interesting to Maria and Jan, her partner who wrote the screenplay. What they're really interested in is the human and the imperfections of the human, and also of the robot, so it's like a robot trying to be human, learning how to be imperfect as well as to be the perfect human, if that makes any sense.
Yes. And the film takes place sort of slightly into the future. It's never really clear how far, but the tech wouldn't really be a preoccupation of the of Alma in the film,
No, and in fact Alma's chief occupation is she's studying like Sumerian cuneiform, like poetry and metaphor in like early script from like 4,000 years ago. So she's like a serious heavyweight academic with her head massively in the past, who is being asked to road test something which seems massively in the future, but is probably not that far away. Yes. But I like that kind of science fiction where it's like 3 weeks or 3 months into the future. It's not yes. flying cars and silver suits. It's like, oh, it's our world, but there's like one element that's a bit different here. Yes. And, which makes it much easier to shoot on a low budget. But it's also, it kind of gets us into the human story much quicker. It's not like, we don't have to scramble around to kind of, well, where are we? What year is this? It's like, well, it's pretty much now. But this is sort of where we're headed potentially.
So in terms of your performance, I did think a little bit about The Guest, which is not a much different genre. It's more of a horror film or thriller, but there's a certain right. stillness that you need that's very effective both in that film and this film. But then also you just mentioned your love of physical comedy. How much did your role in Eurovision a year or two ago kind of crack open your career in a different way? Because it was so hilarious, but required a lot more from you physically.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, the answer is I don't fully know yet, because it's only been a year, but it's definitely opened up doors to comedy
Yeah.
more than perhaps before. And it's something that I've always loved, always enjoyed, but it's not necessarily something people know you can do or want to do until you do it. And it sort of takes a role like Lemtov sometimes, it's quite a good showcase for just I'm here, and I'm prepared to be very silly if necessary. And that was a wonderful role, in terms of physicality, vocally, getting to spark with, Will Ferrell, Rachel McAdams, and just have an enormous amount of fun. And I think, yeah, we'll see what it leads to down the line. But I think already, that film had just come out, I think, when we started shooting I'm Your Man. And I think just the sense that, yeah, that I could sort of embrace comedy a bit more, and the physical comedy, and it's interesting you bring up the guests. It's not something I sort of immediately associate with this film, but even that had a certain physical comedy in terms of, it was sort of satirizing some of those sort of B action movies, and kind of the physicality that's required for that in the wrong scenario is pretty funny, I think. Not everyone saw that film as a comedy, but I definitely do.
A film that people really should go back and revisit if they haven't seen or visit it. About 5 or 6 years ago, it came out, and was quite a corker. I thought it really really deserved a lot of attention. Fun. Now, you just mentioned filming. Was this is this a pandemic movie? Was it made?
Yes, very much so. I think the screenplay was written pre-pandemic, I should say. We started shooting in July, late June, maybe, of last year. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the first films that had been able to shoot under the new protocols in Berlin. And so we were really, really lucky to get to do that. It was a very scaled down crew working very, very hard. We were lucky we got to shoot a lot of the apartment stuff in a studio, so we could have a sort of more controlled environment. But it was the first thing I think any of us had shot in the new world. And it was interesting. It had a, I mean, I think this film would have had an intense focus to it anyway, but I think it really lent something to that, that sort of intimacy of it. It was really interesting. It's also one of the first sets I've worked on where it was, I think about 2/3 of the crew were female. And that had a really interesting vibe to the set, which was, it was very cool. And that was something Maria was very, very keen to champion.
There are also shots from the window of Alma's apartment, and the city looks very barren. I mean, you don't see a lot of people on the streets.
Right. Yeah.
Which I guess was by design, given what was going on, really.
Maybe. Yeah. I mean, Berlin last summer was relative to here, quite open, I think. But you're right. It wasn't. There wasn't the usual kind of tourist traffic or anything. It was a really interesting time to be there. I hadn't thought of that, actually, that the streets looked, less.
Perhaps it's the way we see, maybe for me, the way we see things now. Just it's just so weird seeing any movie without people wearing face masks, even if it was made 20 years ago. It's like,
I'm waiting to see. Because when you shoot stuff now, all the background artists, they wear masks, and then like the seconds before the take, they say, okay, masks off, and everyone whips them off, and they call action and they do the scene. But there's bound to be, in the next year or two, like little shots in the back where they're like, that guy's wearing a mask.
I want to pick up on what you said about the cast and the crew being 2/3 female by talking about your both your co-stars, Sandra Hüller, who we all love so much in Tony Erdmann.
Yes.
And she has a supporting role here, which also evolves very interestingly as the film goes on.
Yes.
But especially Maren Eggert, who did win an acting prize when the film premiered in Berlin earlier this year, which is great.
Just won the Lola for Best Actress at the German Film Prize as well.
Wonderful.
Amazing achievement. And she gave such an amazing performance, so naturalistic and human. And in fact, I think Sandra Hüller aside, I think Maria really cast it with, I mean, Sandra Hüller is an incredible actress, but the other actors were incredibly naturalistic, very, very human. And Sandra's performance is so funny because it's a bit like Tom, just sort of very sweet and earnest and wanting to succeed, wanting to be the best version of herself that she can be, wanting to be very good at her job. Tom equally just wants to serve and be the best Tom he can be for Alma, but just getting it slightly wrong. And I think, it was wonderful to have Sandra's humor around, and to lend that tone to this, to the robot side of things.
Yes.
But Maren's performance is wonderful and very difficult. I think also, I mean, it's always difficult acting opposite me, but especially when I'm not a human. I think, not that usual back and forth with a scene partner. It was challenging at first for both of us, to sort of break the norms and not get to play off each other in quite the same way that we would normally. But we found our groove. I think we found a way of making that work, but it was interesting.
Maren is one of those actors who can smile but still seem sort of sad or melancholy.
True.
Loneliness is a theme that runs through the film, and I think it's a very interesting take on that subject. And I think her performance, there's lots of wit there. She's obviously, she's an academic. Her character is very smart, but you see this sort of the lonely sadness that's right beneath that. How is that playing off of? I mean, you want to talk a little bit more about that in terms of being a scene partner for her?
Yeah, well, I think Tom is constantly learning, constantly calibrating and trying to sort of adjust and improve according to what Alma needs. And you're right, there is a sort of, there's a longing, even though, despite what she's saying, and intellectually she knows that this is absurd. And that's what sort of lends itself to that screwball comedy element where it's like, these two characters shouldn't be together. She knows it's wrong. This is never going to happen. And yet sort of against her better judgment, he kind of gets under her skin because I think he wants to adjust, he wants to learn. And the more nuanced he gets, and it's a kind of pretty rapidly evolving AI, that he kind of reads a situation and knows that, okay, well, I should play this card. I should be this character for her now. This is what she needs. And I think it's very interesting. It's interesting on a human level. It's interesting on an android level of kind of like trying to read what your partner needs. What does this person need in this moment? And how empathetic am I in this situation? How much do I see that? How much do I read that? And I think Tom is very astute in that regard. He gets it wrong initially and is kind of coming up with all the good stuff that she doesn't really want, but doesn't really care for. But it's interesting to sort of watch that evolve and to kind of, I suppose we had to sort of grade how much human and how much robot you saw in any given moment. But in those later moments, just sort of finding the empathy and showing enough of the human that showed some progress and showed something that Alma kind of against her better judgment falls for.
Yes. Also, just wanted to ask about working with Maria, your director. Speaking of foreign language films and series, I think it was the first time they ever aired a foreign language TV series here in the U.S. was a series called Deutschland 83,
right?
In which he is fantastic as a very cunning aunt of the main character.
Yes.
Having someone with her experience as an actor, be your director, what was it like on set? I mean, was there more freedom perhaps for you to try things, to do extra takes?
Yes and no. I mean, I think I don't know about the freedom to do extra takes because we were under massive time pressure and it was a very small production. But yeah, I mean, there's an implicit understanding from an actor director, I think, of the kind of the playfulness or the playful environment required, perhaps. And again, it's actor to actor. I personally really enjoy that sort of playground environment. Yes, I mean, she instinctively knew, you know, when I was saying about looking at the Cary Grant and Jimmy Stewart stuff, just kind of, she knew the physical boxes to tick that would sort of get me fired up for the role physically, I think. You know, and we had a great fun just sort of looking at those elements together. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked with actor directors and non-actor directors, and it's always different. But I think it's you kind of get into the weeds pretty quickly with an actor director. They just know how to just tweak certain little dials, you know, and rather than just like, could you just do it better, you know? It's sort of, it can be a bit more specific, a bit more technical. Yeah, I mean, I think particularly for Maren, you know, there's some very emotional stuff, some really interesting stuff that they got into. You know, our relationship was different, I think. You know, and I was very much, I was quite keen to sort of hand over Tom to Maria and the costume designer and the makeup designer, you know, rather than sort of imprinting my idea of what I thought Tom should look like. I was like, well, what does your man look like? You know, and sort of giving over myself to Maria was quite interesting. But she was terrific, I thought, and just had a real kind of, yeah, I think because she'd written the screenplay with her partner, Jan, you know, there's a lot of their wit in it, you know, when you get to know them both and see them both together. And that really it was wonderful to have her kind of convey that, I think, and the tone and the playfulness and the wit behind the creation of the screenplay was great.
Yes. And one last question for you, Dan. You know, there's so many examples over, really go back to the silent era, Greta Garbo, foreign language actors coming and being in English language movies. And not as many examples. There are some like you for this, and Jodie Foster has done it as well, and Kristen Scott Thomas has acted in French films.
Yeah.
But what do you think that there's? Are you excited by the potential, of this now that you've just done it for the second time, but much more visibly now, of acting perhaps maybe in more German language movies, or even seeing other people? Perhaps even learn. I think Tilda Swinton learned Italian once to be in a movie.
Yes, and isn't she in the Thai?
Yes, she is.
Yeah, is she speaking Thai in that?
Oh, yeah, I don't think so, but
okay. It wouldn't surprise me if Tilda Swinton had learned Thai. But yes, in answer to your question, yes, I am. I mean, I'm personally very intrigued and excited to work there again, in some form. I had a blast, and it's a really different. Some of it's the same and some of it's totally different and engaging. But yeah, I think, in recent years, I think with all these streamers as well, the popularity of foreign language shows and films has really risen. I think people have sort of gotten over being put off by subtitles. I'm watching Squid Game currently, of course, like everyone. And
we all watched Parasite a couple of years ago.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think people are beginning to sort of appreciate that, it's, I forget which director it was. It might have been Guillermo del Toro who said that it's not like every film is foreign to somebody. Yeah. And it's actually, and I think they changed it to international feature, in light of that, it's not a foreign, I mean, yes, it's foreign language, but they're not foreign. They're stories, and we're just storytelling around the world, using slightly different words. But it's I'm delighted by how far this film has already traveled. And how many languages it's been released in just in the last couple of months. I think we come out in Italy tomorrow, and Norway last week. And it's great, and. So yeah, I mean, there's huge potential for it, and I'm thrilled to have done it, and thrilled that it seems to be being received so well.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations again. I'm really excited to have people see it too, because there are some scenes there at the end that get people really thinking as the film finishes up. So without going into that here, it's going to be a movie you really want to, keeping to the theme of it, find someone to talk to.
Yes.
A real person, if possible, about what the film really means. So best of luck as you keep going on with the movie and everyone seeing it. And thank you so much.
Thanks very much.